I would like to welcome all of you on behalf of the Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung to today's event. My name is Juliane Schulte and I am the Foundation's representative since the end of last year. Tomorrow, Germany will take over the presidency in the EU Council. And I mean, even without the coronavirus, we all know that there are huge challenges ahead. And now the corona pandemic adds to that. And it's the role of the EU presidency to be an honest broker and to take into account all member states' specific needs and interests. And we as FES Romania asked ourselves, what are the needs and interests of the Central Eastern European member states? What are their expectations towards the German EU presidency? How do they position themselves towards the most pressing issues facing the German EU presidency? And Radu Magdin wrote a paper for us, and he's going to present the main points and arguments he made in this paper that deal with the questions I just mentioned. Radu is a political analyst and consultant and the CEO of SmartLink Communications. He has worked as an advisor to the Romanian and the Moldovan Prime Minister and spent 5 years in Brussels with the European Parliament, Euractiv and Google. Then I have the honor to welcome among us Ambassador Lazar Comanescu. He is a counselor on foreign affairs at the Chamber of Commerce and Industry of Romania. He was Minister of Foreign Affairs of Romania in 2008 and then again from 2015 until 17. And before that, from 2001 until 2008, he served as Romania's representative to the European Union. And from 2009 until 2015, he was the ambassador of Romania to Germany. When discussing about the German EU presidency, we of course also need a German expert. I'm happy to welcome Kai Olaf Lang. He is a senior fellow at the Stiftung Wissenschaft und Politik, a Berlin-based think tank that advises German decision makers on international politics and foreign security policy. And I would say that he's the think tank's man for all things Central and Eastern European. Well, before we start, maybe some housekeeping. Your mic should be mute, and we would kindly ask to let them mute. And in the second half of the event, we will take up the questions of the participants. And well, we wanted to have a kind of virtual roundtable, and during a roundtable, people are allowed to ask questions, and you also see each other during the round table. That is why we chose this model that you can see who's in. And if you want to ask a question, then please click on the item raise hand so that we know that you want to ask a question, or you can also write your questions, of course, in the chat. But please keep your questions short. And then I just saw that we also have the honor to welcome Victor Negrescu among us. Victor Negrescu is currently a member of the European Parliament and a former Romanian Minister for European Affairs. Welcome, good morning. And maybe also one note, I mean, Zoom meetings have one big advantage, and that is that you can invite participants from different European cities. So today we do not only have the Romanian international community, but also people from Berlin and from Brussels among us. So welcome all of you. Radu, from your point of view, what are the main stakes or the most important topics for the Central and Eastern European EU member states regarding the EU agenda for the next 6 months? And maybe you can also a bit elaborate, where will they take a common stance and be a tough negotiation partner, and where, on the other hand, could they help Germany to make its presidency a success? Radu, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Juliane. And a big thanks also to the Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung for your support for this report and for the high enthusiasm you had for this initiative from the very beginning. Also, a round of thanks for all of you during these calls, for the speakers, and for all the people who took an hour and a half of their agenda for this topic. Now, we have a multinational audience, and this is a big honor for me. I'll try to be so less Romanian specific, more regional specific, and more in depth into, let's say, the Brussels agenda, but also more widely in our attitude of global Europeans. The case I'm stating in this report is that Central and Eastern Europe is more constructive than some people may think. Central and Eastern Europe understands well that German success is European success during the German EU presidency. And of course, the region as a whole is also a region which has become in the past few years increasingly aware and vocal about its interests. Now, this awareness does not necessarily mean a bad attitude as regards the EU. I would say that although we can't always talk about Central and Eastern Europe as a monolith, so of course there are always nuances. Of course there are different shades of EU engagement on different policies, on the EU as a whole, different interests. This is normal, but nonetheless, this region comes as a whole historically, at least when talking about 2 or 3 topics. One of the topic is pretty simple. It has to do with money. Money as they translate into mostly cohesion, but also other policies like agriculture. And separate of all, I would say that this region has become not necessarily like somebody in a previous Republican administration labeled it, speaking of geopolitics, as New Europe, but this region is a transatlantic pillar for its most. I say for its most because the majority of the countries still have a very strong attachment for the transatlantic relationship. And although perhaps some players like Hungary are believers into diversification, to use a very diplomatic term, you know, in terms of great power competition, and they have a very warm relationship with Russia and China, I would say that the region as the whole also has separate, let's say, from the money cohesion issue, also this transatlantic component still close to its backbone. Now, that being said, I would say that the next few months had what you may call a before Corona agenda. And here I beg to disagree with a lot of the analysts or scholars who have been shifted the world into a BCAC kind of an existence. And I would plead for something which I've been doing in the past few weeks, for a BCDC worldview. By DC, I mean during Corona, because it's overly optimistic to make plans for after Corona, because we are stuck also from a health perspective, and for sure also from an economic perspective in the next few months, at least, not to mention next few years in this during Corona period. So there is, in terms of the BC agenda, I think that it was pretty clear that the German presidency was going to be ambitious. And in the most of the cases, the Central and Eastern Europe would support this ambition. I think we have seen changes also as regards some states which were historically reticent towards too much traction from Berlin, or from Berlin and Paris via Brussels. For example, we have seen a few years ago a Polish foreign minister who rightfully said, "I fear more German inaction than German action." And I would say this quote is reflective, particularly in such a key moment for Europe, in Central and Eastern European attitude towards Germany. We need strong German leadership. We need ambitious German leadership. What we want is, again, I'm generalizing, there are always nuances in capitals, but I would say what Central and Eastern Europe wants is a legitimate issue, namely to be listened to. Now, this listening and this active listening means also some kind of a translation in policies of the interest that Central and Eastern Europeans have. Now, speaking of before Corona and during Corona, and this is where I'll focus my argument for the next concluding 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes, I would say that an interesting reframing has been taking place. If one looks at predictions as regards the German EU presidency, we know very well that energy, and particularly, let's say, the green component, the Green Deal, and dealing with climate action was expected. You know, this dealing with climate emergency was expected to be one of the German priorities. And if we're looking at what initially happened when we were under, in a way, Corona shock in Europe in March, we saw a very interesting hitting the ground running response from Brussels, Berlin, and other capitals. If you remember, in March, we had some voices who came and said, in Eastern Europe, who came and said, let's drop the Green Deal. It's too expensive, we can't afford it. And then something very interesting happened, speaking of reframing, but this reframing is not just a wording issue, because I've been doing a lot of communications as a political operator. So I'm not just talking about the cosmetics of this operation, but also about the policies. We have shifted, in fact, from Green Deal to green recovery. Because whether we like it or not, the focus of the German presidency is recovery first. And its main component is green recovery. Of course, you can further add some spices and call this a green and digital recovery, or call this a green digital unhealthy recovery. But nonetheless, realistically speaking, we're talking about a green recovery, green investment, and of course, how do you pay for this? And this is where a possible catfight may come on two components, namely, like Jeremy Maguire used to say, with show me the money. Where do we get this? Because I think this would also trigger in the months to come, and possibly in the years to come, when the paycheck is going to come. How do we perceive, or how do we still perceive the EU? Because even this purse, this Brussels purse, because we claim that Brussels should help, Brussels should bring, Brussels should rule, but with what resources? I think first of all, we have had this obstacle of agreeing, and we will hopefully breach this obstacle under the German presidency at the July summit, on how do we adjust the resources, how do we have a new MFF, but separate from, and this would be, let's say, a first catfight. Yes, an additional catfight, not necessarily under the German presidency, but it will be a talk under the German presidency. Are there any specific policies that we're supposed to change, also in terms of taxation rules in the EU? How do we pay for this recovery? Particularly since one of the hot potatoes was also supposed to be Brexit. So less money at the EU budget after the Brits are out. And the third tinier catfight for the moment, because apparently we're busy with the recovery, namely the link up in between the rule of law and possible access to the EU funds. Separate from these possible moments for catfights, are there regional catfights for more money, more or less money, or let's say specific national or bilateral in case of a coupling? We'll see also the result of the elections in Poland soon, of the second round, but let's just say we'll see if there will still be a tandem in between Hungary and Poland on some aspects of the European common interest for the moment. But separate from that, I would say that Central and Eastern Europe is going to be much more constructive than people think. And I think that one of the mistakes which is sometimes being done in Brussels, I'm saying this also as a previous Brussels operators, but also as somebody who is watching closely the European affairs debate in Brussels, Paris, and Berlin, is all too often Eastern Europe is a bit underestimated and is being seen as just watching the EU game from the perspective of defensive interest in terms of cohesion and agricultural fund. I think, first of all, we're going to see nuances in the months and years to come. For example, some of the Baltics will say, hey, I'm highly digital. So essentially, I'm also going to be looking also for some digital recovery plans. I want to be coupled with the fourth industrial revolution. I want to be in touch with the future. So some nuances here. And separate of all, I think you will see increasingly some bilateral nuances. So for example, although Romania has an energy game and an energy strategy at home, interestingly, if you're watching the Romanian debate on EU affairs, one of the main things which the EU funds minister is putting on the agenda in the past months is an artificial intelligence strategy, a hydrogen, speaking of also Berlin, a hydrogen plans strategy for Romania, and so on. So again, more constructive than believed, some inevitable catfights, some inevitable negotiations. I believe with the German tact, fully aware of the challenges ahead, and with the focus on recovery first, we can pull ahead. This is the essence of the argument. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you, Radu, and thank you also for writing this, in my opinion, excellent paper. Ambassador Comanescu, from your perspective as a former foreign minister, what is at stake for Romania and what are the most important topics for your country?
Well, thank you very much, first of all, for inviting me to participate in this debate. And I'll start by congratulating the Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung and his representation here in Bucharest for this initiative. I'm absolutely sure that it will. It has already. I see from the screen it generated some interest, high interest, I would say, and I am glad to see that. I thank you very much also for inviting me to be, and I'm honored to be speaker today. And I will also thank Radu Magdin and his team for providing us with a top quality and valuable paper. And I have to say that I'm almost fully subscribed to their evaluation. Okay, now coming to the next EU presidency. Though formally, Germany has not yet presented the priorities and the objectives for the next 6 months. I understand that it will happen on the 8th of July in the European Parliament. I nevertheless think that we do avail of enough elements which would allow us to make some judgments or some considerations thereon. Before being more specific to what you have been mentioning, I'm referring to Romania's expectations, please allow me one or two remarks of a rather more general nature. First, I think that we have to underline that the takeover by Germany of the EU presidency is by itself looked at with particular interest, and I don't think that I have to elaborate that much on why. The context in which this presidency is to be carried out happens, however, in a most complex and difficult, I would say, period. Indeed, this presidency is coming under the exceptional environment generated by the pandemics, which probably is the top challenge of these days. But that adds also to other important challenges the EU is facing with climate change and objectives, digitalization, acute disturbances, I would say, in the international environment, including questioning the international order and its multilateral framework, and not least, all these will impact what used to be itself a difficult topic, namely the negotiations for the next multi-annual financial framework, not to add also the Brexit. So in such an environment, it becomes all the more important that over the next 6 months, the presidency is being held by Germany. My second remark, still on general nature. Looking at what Berlin seems to have established as priorities, I may have reasons to be optimistic. The messages conveyed by Chancellor Angela Merkel in a recent interview with the top European journals, newspapers, are, in my opinion, quite encouraging. But on the other hand, I need to say that we need to keep realistic and do not ignore the complexity and difficulties to overcome. But again, the priorities established under the motto, "Together for Europe's recovery," seem to be well defined. I'll not elaborate on that. One last point. There are many who say that EU is currently at a crossroad, or that the EU is confronted with an existential crisis. Without diminishing the magnitude of and the complexity of the current challenges, I may, as the Chancellor said in the above mentioned interview, remember that the EU evolved through crisis and evolved towards more integration. And I allow myself to be confident that that will be the case with the current situation as well. Now, looking at the picture from the Central and Eastern European member states, and more specifically Romania, while reiterating that I subscribe to Radu Magdin's evaluations, I will stress a few points. First, unity and solidarity, and I would add inclusiveness, are essential for ensuring a coherent and effective response to the challenges. And speaking about inclusiveness, I feel fair to say that we should appreciate the fact that Germany has been, throughout the recent years, the main promoters among the so-called old member states of the EU of the inclusiveness principle. And that's an extremely important point, and I wanted to stress it. Now, speaking about this unity, solidarity, and exclusiveness, that requires some prerequisites. First and foremost, a balanced approach between recovery measures and implementation of the objectives previously agreed at the level of the European Union, such as those aiming at bridging the gap that continues to exist between the western tier of the EU and the eastern one. Second, maintaining a central role of the two major investment policies, i.e. cohesion and the common and agricultural policy. Because this has to do a lot with an objective of the pandemic, that the pandemic revealed as becoming extremely important for the European Union, which is resilience. Let me explain a little bit on that. So long as the infrastructure, the critical one included, remains as it is today in Central and Eastern Europe, though many improvements have been registered, the benefits of the recovery measures will remain unbalanced. We discussed, for example, about meeting the Green Deal objectives. Making the Danube a west-east water transportation highway, like the Rhine, would be an appropriate answer. And just let me provide a brief argument. You know that, the experts have calculated that to transport on the Danube 18,000 tons of goods, that means a chain of 6 barges, 3,000 tons each. Transportation of these goods by trucks, by land, would mean roughly 1,000 trucks. Make the difference in terms of pollution between the two possible ways, not to speak about the benefits in terms of exchange of goods. So the inclusion of the Danube waterway transportation project as a priority within the next MFF would be for the interest of the EU as a whole. That is also valid for another important project in our region, the so-called Via Carpathia. Still on the resilience, much is now being discussed about relocation. Here we have to look from a different perspective as to the one up to now. What I want to say is that maximization of the profit shouldn't be the only driving force, but an appropriate balance between direct profits and resilience. Another resilience-related aspect has to do with the protection of the EU external borders. And I hope advances would take place under the German presidency towards renormalizing Schengen including by admission of Romania in this area. My second remark, we as Central and East European countries have to give consideration, due consideration, all of them, all of us, due consideration to substantiating our contribution to the strengthening of the European Union, including in terms of values and principles. Rule of law is a must. And I personally see added value, including in linking the access to the EU funds to the respect of this rule of law. And probably, not probably, I'm absolutely sure that a EU-wide mechanism in this respect would be the appropriate way to follow. Third, the recovery plan. Though it is still at the stage of a Commission proposal, and albeit subject to tough negotiations, I'm sure, among the member states, this recovery plan opens new and real opportunities. Here again, an appropriate balance between the west of the EU and the east of the EU is of paramount importance. On the other hand, and I speak as a representative of the Romanian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, the direct involvement of the business communities in the member states, in devising the priority areas and priority projects is a must. I do value greatly the capabilities of governments, but again, since I've been working closely with the Chamber of Commerce, I realize how important it is to involve from the very beginning in all the process, throughout the process. The business community is an absolute necessity. My fourth remark, and this is on the external action of the European Union and its role globally. I hope that Germany will push ahead for the advancement of the integration of the Western Balkans. No need to elaborate that much on. And I think that in this respect, organizing the first negotiations conferences, intergovernmental conferences with the North Macedonia and Albania before the end of this year would be extremely important signal. Second is, relations with China. It emerges as of particular interest for the European Union to strike an appropriate balance between the need of a long-term partnership while recognizing there is a competition as well with this country. But we should not ignore the fact that there are chapters like climate change, multilateralism, which are areas of, I would say, important cooperation. And I think that it is in the interest of the European Union and in general of the Euro-Atlantic area to avoid pushing China towards closer relations with Russia. Last but not least, there shouldn't be a problem or questioning between a need of EU strategic autonomy and the necessity to work for a strengthened transatlantic relationship, so long as the basis, therefore, is commitment to the same set of values and principles. My fifth remark and the final one, I hope that under the German presidency, the Conference on the Future of Europe would be effectively launched. And at the end, it will result in a stronger and more integrated European Union, as the only way, in my opinion, for the EU to continue and eventually to strengthen its role as a global actor. I think that that would imply extending the areas under the EU competencies. COVID teaches us health should be one of them, but not only one, the only one. Here again, inclusiveness is of paramount importance. So these are my remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. So what I heard from you a bit was that there is still in some areas a gap between the East and the West, that we always need a balance. And Radu, you also said that Central Eastern Europe is sometimes a bit underestimated, and that it has to be listened. So I would like to turn to Kai Olaf. There has been a lot of talk those months on how to avoid a North-South divide. I think that is a lesson from the financial crisis, that we have to avoid that. But indeed, as the other two speakers said, Germany will also have to avoid an East-West rift. So what should Germany be aware of during its presidency to avoid such an East-West rift and fulfill indeed its role as an honest broker? And where do you see special potential for cooperation?
Thank you, Juliane, and thank you for having me. I also think it's a very valuable initiative to debate German Central European relations in an EU context immediately before the German Council presidency. And I think, and that's a more general remark at the beginning, also referring to what Ambassador Comanescu said, Germany sent a very strong signal to the whole of the European Union in advance of the presidency. And it, in a way, was not connected at all to the presidency proper. And that was, of course, after a period of silence or even reluctance in the first weeks of the pandemic in Europe, there was this Franco-German initiative. And this Franco-German initiative launching, supporting the idea of a huge recovery fund, what is now called the EU Next Generation instrument, is, I think, a very strong message that Germany, in spite of the fact that such huge rescue packages are not very popular in Germany, and that they to a certain extent run counter to what many think in terms of financial policies, Germany was ready to assume its responsibility. And I think this also reflects in what the Chancellor said in the aforementioned interview, in a very kind of basic sentence, which many might argue is evident, but I think it's important to stress this again and again. So what is good for Europe is good for Germany. So I think the German political elites understood that Germany, I always call this, is a systemic country. So Germany cannot refrain from support, otherwise the whole mechanism is in danger in a situation of a pressing crisis as we have it now. I think Germany was absorbed very much, of course, by the need to stabilize, to give new aid to the southern countries. And that was the original, I think that was originally a very strong motive. So we had indeed, as Juliane mentioned it, a strong tendency towards a debate in the EU between, let's say, the New North, what is now called the Frugal Four, and the countries, especially Italy and Spain, which were affected heavily by the crisis and which needed help. I think quite soon after that, the question of Central Eastern European member states came again in, and I think at least in the context of when the first numbers and the so-called allocation keys came about of the recovery plans and of the adapted proposals for the multi-annual financial framework. Because the countries of the region were calling for a fair deal, because some of them feel that there might be a risk that there is a redistribution from poorer countries in the east to more wealthy countries in the south of the European Union. What we saw in this context is, I think, a new differentiation of interests in Central Eastern Europe. I followed it quite a little bit in the context of the Visegrad countries. And the Visegrad countries, if you look at the current, and it's true, we're still in a negotiation, right? The current attitudes towards the next generation instrument, we have at least one country which is very much in favor, that's Poland. Also Slovakia, apart from Slovakia's new finance minister, who is a little bit balanced, who says we are benefiting from it, but in terms of financial policies, I have some doubts. And then on the other hand, we have Czech Prime Minister Babiš and the Hungarian government, who are very skeptical about the way, for example, that criteria are designed. Mr. Babiš, for example, said it is not a very reasonable and understandable criterion to take the level of unemployment from 2015 to 2019 as one of the criteria for distributing money in the recovery fund, because it has nothing to do with the implications of the pandemic. Now, we might discuss if this is true or not. What we see at least is that we have two countries, the Czech Republic and Hungary, which in some questions move a little bit closer to the frugal four. Also, if you look at the MFF, we are now facing a little bit the scenario of the future interests, where the Czech Republic has a level, I think, of 90% of the average EU GDP. So they're still part of the Friends of Cohesion group, but I think in a couple of years they might be net payers. So on a meeting, during a meeting in the town of Lednice in southern Moravia in the Czech Republic, the Visegrad group kind of the beginning of June tried to aggregate the opinions and to put it together, but there are some really considerable differences. Second remark on Green Deal, which of course is connected to the financial issues. I think here we have an important process of deep change in these countries, because some have said, and at some point I also had the impression that the climate issue might be the new East-West divide after the migration crisis. I think this assessment is not really true. It is true, as Radu said, in a couple of countries there are reservations, especially about the high ambitions of the EU's policies. However, what I observe is that more and more countries are accepting this policy, and they are even try to see it as a new form of transformation, as a second huge wave of economic transformation, and they even see the opportunities of modernization. So even in Poland, for example, you have now a debate about conservative ecologism. Yeah, so saying that also the conservative part of the political scenery, which for the time being was very reluctant. So we have to discover this, not to leave it to the liberals and to the left, because there are huge opportunities for our countries in it. So we have to do it, but it is also something we should do. So we might have the beginning of a sort of ownership, at least. I think the traditional resistance has gone. At the beginning of the corona pandemic, there have been voices in the Central European countries arguing that now that's not the moment to be ambitious. We have to slow down. Prime Minister Babiš again in the Czech Republic, for example, or some people from the Polish government. Nevertheless, from the same government camps, we have heard that countries will continue. So the ministries of environment, for example, or the Ministry of Climate in Poland they say, yeah, we have to come to terms with it, and we have to make the best of it. So I think when it comes to climate, we're in a period where it's not, from the Central Eastern European point of view, a question of it, not a question of if, but of how and how to make the best of it. Foreign and security, a lot has been already said about this. I can be brief in our discussion. My impression is that also Central European countries, in spite of the caveats many have and of this kind of transatlantic imperative they have in their foreign policies, and in spite of the fact, I agree completely to what has been said, that many of the countries of the regions have a sort of yes but attitude towards the notion of strategic autonomy. Yes, we have to do more, but not in order to erect something which would lead to a watering down of transatlantic nexus. And I think Germany is on the same page in spite of the turbulences we have in US-German bilateral relationship. But I think the process of change which is going on here, and which, as I said, also Central Europeans and Southeast Europeans are increasingly discovering, is that what many in France, but also some in Germany, call European sovereignty, is something which is maybe less and less, or which is not only, at least, about security and defense and foreign policies, but it's about industrial policies. It's about digital sovereignty. So I think we have a very strong economic, infrastructural aspect in the debate about what is called strategic autonomy. And I think we should much more reinforce our discussions about that, apart from only focusing on a concept which is, of course, the right one, which is a good one, and which links us, I mean, especially Germany and Central Eastern Europe, that is effective multilateralism. But I think we should start from kind of rethinking strategic autonomy or European sovereignty in this more holistic way, including questions like the 3 Cs initiative, which is also part of this story. We also have a debate now about bringing productions, relocating them back to the European Union, and the eastern part of the EU might be a region where these investments might come back. I'm not completely optimistic in that respect, but I think there are some opportunities, provided that some preconditions will be met. Last point on the Conference of Europe, or in a more broader sense on the future of Europe debate. I find it interesting that one aspect, maybe it's too early, but that one aspect has not yet really emerged in the debates in Central European, Southeastern European countries, including the ones who have, as they call it, a Euro-realistic, or call it Euro-skeptical approach. And that is the fact, the most striking example for this for me is Poland. That's the fact that the new, not only the new financial instruments, not only their size, but the way they are designed, new common taxes, new taxes for the European Union, possibility of debt for the European Commission, the European Union. This might lead to a sort of unintended or intended, but a sort of indirect deepening of the European Union. That some politicians in Germany, for example, but also in the think tank and public debate, use the notion of the Hamilton moment of the EU now. So kind of like in the early stage of the United States, where the communalization of debt, at least in a kind of hidden way, has huge political spillover. I'm astonished that apart from some single voices, this has not led to a more vivid debate in those countries, at least in the eastern part of the European Union, who want to safeguard and maintain their sovereignty. But maybe this will appear when we talk the future of Europe in the framework of the Conference of Europe. I think last sentence, in that context, it will be, might be an important accent. What is this endeavor about? Is it just a routine exercise for governments especially to show we do something, we want to include citizens, and then it's a rather unspectacular outcome? Or is this the beginning of a more ambitious project? What I noticed, and this has, we don't know what this means, that has no kind of, it's not a decision. But what I noticed that in Germany, for example, the German Chancellor from time to time now talks about treaty change, something where Germany was very reluctant in the past. So what does this mean? Treaty changes, what for? To make the EU, to improve the capability to act in foreign affairs, for example, majority voting, for example, might be one aspect. Or might this whole project lead to a more differentiated multi-speed project? To conclude, and here I would agree with what has been said, and also what Ambassador Comanescu said. I think Germany has been and remains the advocate of unity and the involvement of all member states. We have seen it quite plastically after the strong Franco-German statement. There was, for example, a video summit between Germany and the Visegrad countries. Yeah, so that was, at least on the symbolical and on the dialogue level, a signal that Germany wants to hold, to bring these, in order to remain, or to hold the contact with these countries. So, in my opinion, in this respect, the German presidency will be also a continuation in a completely different context and by other means, but of the language of the Bratislava summit and of the Sibiu summit. So the language and approach which is based on consolidating the EU, stabilizing it, and revitalizing especially the economy, but holding the EU 27 together.
Thank you, Kai Olaf. Before I open for everyone to ask questions, I have two questions, and I see that it's also of interest for what I can read in the chat. So regarding the Green Deal, Kai Olaf, you sounded quite optimistic that there will be some progress on it, and you also said that there has been some change when it comes to the attitude of the Central Eastern European countries towards the Green Deal, that this might not be the new East-West dividing line. But then I also heard some skepticism in the statements of Radu and Ambassador Comanescu. Radu, you said that there has been a reframing, there has been talk about green recovery, and that one has to see how to pay for that. And Ambassador Comanescu, you also said that there has to be a balanced approach, that there are also other important things such as infrastructure and so on. So do you share Kai Olaf's optimism when it comes to the Green Deal? Do you think that Central Eastern European governments are open to it? And do you think that there will be enough money to also support the Central Eastern European member states to adapt their economies? Yes, please.
Should I go with the more wider general consideration view, and then Ambassador Comanescu goes for the Romanian view?
Please. Okay. Good idea. Yes.
So I'll go for speaking of. I made a comment which may have seemed a little bit controversial on perhaps sometimes underestimating capitals in the East. I think a lot of Eastern elites have come back to their countries and they feel pretty motivated. You know, although we still have a pretty strong brain drain, I would say we still have a substantial number of intelligentsia in the different capitals. Now, this intelligentsia, of course, has been schooled, trained in the US or in Western Europe, which means we have also studied mostly these models. And of course, we're looking closely, to, at least those of us who are informed, we're looking closely at the debates which are happening in Western Europe. Now, speaking of frameworks and also maturity, a lot of the, if it's not the stakeholders, at least their advisory teams are going to have some very, very concrete things on their table. The difference, for example, in between theory and practice. In theory, Romania will be the beneficiary of 30-something billion, we heard initially around 2-3 weeks ago. Then President Iohannis maximized expectation when he said 40-something billion, you know, that he had a chat with Charles Michel and this is what we're aiming for and so on. Now, for sure, this expectations game is being played in the capital as well. But this is, again, it's what? It's theoretical money, because this is project-based money. Now, speaking of one of the vulnerabilities and one of the things for which I think we may see some quacks, not cracks, but quacks, like beautiful ducklings, you know, is speaking of debates in the future. I think that, for example, one of the elements of Euroscepticism, but perhaps Eurorealism in this case, as regards this project, is where do we have the know-how as consultancies, as people, as others, to attract all this money? Because that's what I'm saying. Theoretically, let's say we're very happy that we're getting, let's say, 42 billion. And that, wow, that's wonderful for Romania, right? But if we happen to renew the story that we had with EU funds, also because of our less than perfect capacity, then we have a problem. So I think there is a lot of room for those who are daring and smart in the months to come for joint ventures. And I think perhaps even more than in the case of trade and relocations, I see joint ventures of consultancies and EU consultancies and perhaps EU funds consultancies in the future. Why? Because we may be having the palette of theoretical funds, but we will need to do some joint ventures, let's say, for example, in between a Romanian company in Cluj and a German company in Munich or in Frankfurt, so that we make sure that we have very smart projects which can attract hydrogen-related money, for example, both for Germany, separate from national stimulus, and for Romania. So I see a lot of sharing and a lot of know-how on the bilateral level, less at the regional level. I think we're going to be forced to do this. Otherwise, I think we're going to see a lot of frustrated people in the East under pressure from their national populations, because even parties in the opposition were going to come and say, you said you're pro-Europeans, you said you're very constructive, but hey, look, you're not getting, in fact, those money. And I think, again, what we will be needing in the months and years to come, we're going to need a new reschooling effort in Eastern Europe in terms of upskilling, reskilling, perhaps across Europe. Like Western Europe sometimes complains that we're becoming less competitive in the global game, because for you, that's the global game. Like for example, Alstom and its German counterpart, they were playing the long game in Africa, let's say, and they're complaining about unfair competition from their Chinese counterpart, right? Adding some competitive pressures in Europe, right? But because that's your game, that's the big league. But even for the smaller league, starting from national concerns, secure jobs and so on, even for the small league, we have to make some options and we have to be careful how we manage EU image. I'll give you a very concrete example. I hinted at this because having worked a lot in political communications, I don't like to do spillover or hijacking of agenda. But for example, in the Romanian media in the past few days, and this is where I finish, we're seeing a partial hijack of EU/German issues related, because we're talking too much about what's happening in the slaughterhouse and seasonal workers, and very little about the German presidency, what we can do together in the bilateral relationship, and so on. So I think we're going to have to be very concrete, share know-how, and try to explain to the people even before this acclaimed, future of Europe conference, which is going to be delayed. We need to have a reality talk with our citizens and tell them, hey, this is not a mega purse. We may have some extra taxes, or we may have to do some tax adjustments in between East and West, and so on, to be realistic and to be honest with our citizens.
Ambassador, would you like to add to that?
Well, very briefly. First, I think that I feel the need of some clarification to what Radu was referring to when discussing about the amount of money. I reckon that there may be kind of the confusion. My guess is that when reference from top Romanian officials to the 30 or above 30 billion euros to Romania, that was a reference to the recovery plan, while the reference to the more than 40 billion so on, that's something related to the MFF. So I wouldn't say that there is a confusion. It's about two different, let's say, budgetary lines, if I may say so. Point number one. Now, as far as your remark, Julian, with my reference to the need of balance, you know, what I had in mind primarily is the following aspect. I am glad that the German presidency, through the voice of Chancellor Merkel, underlined the importance of further strengthening the internal the single market. Well, and my reference to what is lacking still in the Central and Eastern European countries has to do with this, because, you know, you cannot have a strengthened single market while you do not avail of the appropriate infrastructure, be it physical one or digital and so on, all throughout the European Union to allow for making benefit of this single market. That's just one example. I mean, we can go on with this, but the time is limited. And let me also pick up from a remark which was made by Kai Olaf, with reference to sovereignty. I subscribe to what he said. I would simply add that there is a need here in the central and eastern part of Europe as well of have a deepened thinking and a reflection on what sovereignty really means today and tomorrow. I have the impression that when it comes to taking position with regards to sovereignty, share sovereignty and so on, still a lot of people are thinking about sovereignty as it used to be end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. I think that we have to think a little bit more in depth, in a more comprehensive and more sophisticated way when we talk about sovereignty today. And that would help also in, I would say, accepting the idea that shared sovereignty is more shared sovereignty is for the interest of each individual member state. Thank you.
Thank you. So does anybody from the participants have any questions? And please raise your hand. But also, I think Kai Olaf raised his hand. I think you would like to react to Radu and Ambassador Gonesco. So please, Kai Olaf.
Yeah, just briefly on optimism. That's of course a sort of long-term optimism when it comes to these greening issues. I just wanted to say that my impression is that things are changing now. Of course, it is true what Radu pointed at, that the key challenge with the new MFF and with the next generation instrument will be absorption capabilities. And what I hear from countries of the region is that one of the priorities in the negotiations, apart from, of course, the figures and the allocation keys, is flexibility. The buzzword is flexibility. Get more leeway to use the money. And I think on a practical level, what Radu said is very important. But the other road some countries would like to go down is certainly to have, let's say, a pragmatic reading of what green projects are. So I'm not an expert on the structural funds, but it depends a little bit what label is on it and what exactly the tangible, the specific criteria you have at the very end. And I think at least in the next time, this will be one of the key battles. How much pragmatism there will be. If you look a little bit to the future, because I always say, I mean, negotiations about MFF, or now the recovery fund, they will be always at the end, to a high extent, something which binds member states together. The MFF is an instrument of togetherness. And of course, there are different interests, but at the end, per definitionem, each government will argue that this is a huge success which came out from the decisive summit. But if you look to the future, I think there indeed is an important aspect. If you look back to the financial crisis and the real economic convergence, I would argue that the countries from the eastern part of the EU came closer to the most countries of the southern part of the EU. And something similar might happen now. It is true that some of the Central Eastern, Southeastern European countries will be heavily affected by the crisis because they have very open economies. They are reliant on the export, and some of the countries are heavily dependent on the automotive sector, which is not in the best shape. For example, Slovakia, with the highest per capita output of cars in the whole world.
I did not hear you now, Kai Olaf. I don't know about the others, but maybe you could repeat the last two sentences. No, I think now, yes, now I think it's not frozen anymore, your picture, so please.
Okay. Even though some of the countries in the region will be heavily affected by the economic crisis, there is a possibility that the downturn will not be as dramatic in the south. Convergence. So the process of shrinking might be less dramatic than in the south, and the return to a growth curve might come earlier if we won't have a huge second wave of the pandemic. And one key variable in this huge challenge of convergence, and that's a very key factor of EU funds. So if we will do an evaluation of the whole monetary and financial instruments in 2, 3, or 4 years, that will be a key factor. How much will these countries have taken advantage of, and how much of the money will not have been used? So the roads there will be flexibility plus improving absorption capacity.
Okay, thank you, Kai Olaf. And then I see that Ms. Plajan raised her hand. She is a political officer with the American Embassy. Please, you just have to unmute you. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Good afternoon. I'd have a question for all the speakers. I've read in articles that Germany plans to push defense cooperation during its 6 months presidency, and I would be interested to hear the opinions of the speakers, and why not of the participants in the talk. To what outcome should we expect after this six months on defense topic? What impact on the transatlantic relation will the outcome have, and which could be Romania's contribution in this debate? Thank you.
Okay. So I think that is a question to all three panelists, but I think Radu and Besser Conescu are especially asked to answer that question. So who would like to start?
I would propose for Ambassador Comănescu to start with Romania, and I'll be doing a more regional overview, if that is fine also with him, because the question was also dealing with Romania's position and contribution in this sense.
Mm-hmm. Okay. You have to unmute your mic, Mr.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Well, if I well understood, the question was because I think that technically speaking, it was a little bit difficult to well understand. Once again, the question was about whether and the fact that Germany is promoting the idea of strengthening or developing defense capabilities in Europe would affect, or is it right? Is it the meaning of the question?
Maybe Ms. Plajan can
Yeah.
answer to that. Mm-hmm.
So the idea was Germany plans to push for defense cooperation in Europe. And I was wondering to what outcome should we expect after this push? What impact on the transatlantic relations, and which can be Romania's contribution to the debate?
Okay, I got the point. Well, first of all, I will start from one of the main objectives established at the level of the North Atlantic Alliance about a better, a more balanced border sharing. The famous 2% of the national budget allocated to defense. And I do not see a contradiction between strengthening the transatlantic link and development of defense capabilities in Europe. So from this perspective, initiatives under the PESCO and so on would, in my opinion, strengthen the capability of the European Union to give an answer to this need of a better border sharing. This is my reaction. I wouldn't see a danger, a risk of negatively affecting the transatlantic link. And there is another point which I want to make. I think that 2% doesn't mean just, let's say, talking about acquisition, buying or selling. Means also developing capabilities to respond to challenges, eventual challenges, depending upon where they are coming from and how much each of the partners within the transatlantic community are ready to get involved. That's an important point which I think has to be made. That's my comment.
Thank you. Radu.
I would say that at least two of the countries in Central and Eastern Europe, the largest, Poland and Romania, have made their positions very clear, and they view any advancement in terms of EU defense as strengthening the European pillar of NATO. What is Romanian contribution? To be constructive enough to the German presidency's plans to help these programs advance, and that's it. Because Romania already has NATO plans, already has special plans in the bilateral relationship, with the United States. So I don't see us fundamentally changing positions, or I don't see the countries in the region fundamentally changing positions. What I see is here not a unified Central and Eastern European voice, but more an increasing in this, and perhaps this 6 months is like a warm-up for the years to come in terms of developments in your defense. I see this as an active warm-up, in case this is, you will have as a presidency the energy to push also for this file, because you already have so many things on your plate with the recovery and other aspects that it's hard to, it's like those feeling we have with our computer, that you have a lot of windows buffering, 50% loaded, 20% loading, 70% loading, and so on. So I think this is going to be one of the buffering windows. I don't think that Germany is too optimistic of advances with all its files at the same time. I think that the primary problem remains for defense and the rift in between East and West is an alignment in strategic culture and threat assessment. Until we do some kind of an alignment in terms of strategic cultures and how we assess and who do we assess, speaking of great power competition, as threats, I think it's going to be very hard to greenlight what European defense matters, because to put things in very concrete terms, for countries such as Poland, Romania, but also the Baltics, EU is prosperity, NATO is security. EU wants to be more security. We have to do some kind of a negotiation in terms of how do we see threats at the eastern border. I've done recently an event with supported by our embassy in Madrid with one of the think tanks there. It was one of the first events talking about Black Sea. Well, imagine talking to a Spanish audience who historically has been looking at the Mediterranean and Latin America being talked about the Black Sea. Whether we like it or not, such conversations have to take place. To quote an Estonian friend, he told me at a recent think tank meeting in Berlin, he told me before COVID, well, the French got it. We need help on our flank and we're going to help them in Sahel. We understand they're more preoccupied about Sahel, but they also need to understand that we're preoccupied about Russia. So any progress from my perspective on Central and East, massive progress or stronger progress, can only be done if we align in strategic cultures and threat assessments.
Kai Olaf, would you like to add something? Just if you would like to.
Yes, I think it will be along the lines we have. I think Germany will try to consolidate PESCO. I think there is a sort of evaluation where we stand with the PESCO projects. So the permanent structured cooperation within the framework of CSDP. I think Germany would also like to see the finishing or the better implementation of the European Defense Fund. There might be also a debate, I think it was the High Representative, Mr. Borrell, who has talked about this, to establish a sort of strategic compass. So a sort of guidelines for the implementation of CSDP. So a sort of a more specific document bringing on the background of the global strategy. But I think the real questions, apart from these kind of path-dependent processes we have, where I think Germany firmly stands on its tradition of having of doing more for European defense and European security, but at the same time trying to stabilize transatlantic relationships. So not an either-or approach, but both European as well as transatlantic. Beyond, of course, the presidency, how to ensure that questions of traditional security will remain on our radar screens and will remain also on the due level in our budgets. Mr. Jiří Šedivý, who is the new head of the European Defense Agency, he comes from the Czech Republic, has appealed to all member states not to dramatically do cuts in their defense budgets. I forgot the numbers, but I recently looked at the figures, how long it took European countries to regain, to be again on the level of pre-crisis spending after the financial and sovereign debt crisis, 2008, 2009. I think it was 6 or 7 years. So this might be a real kind of challenge, because defense issues in a way might fall victim to the economic stabilization of the EU.
Okay.
Yes, please, Ambassador Comanescu. You have to unmute.
To do. Just one very brief remark, because I think that this deserves to be looked at. You know, we spoke and we know that there will be a conference on the future of Europe, and we now already have the so-called Stoltenberg group on the reflection of NATO 2030. And I think that these two processes would or should allow to identify new opportunities for strengthening the EU-NATO cooperation. That was my remark.
Thank you, Ambassador. I would like to profit from the fact that we have a member of the European Parliament among us. So please, Victor, may I ask you for a short intervention?
Yeah, thank you so much. And I would like to thank the speakers for their very interesting interventions. Just a short comment. So, of course, there are high expectations regarding German presidency of the EU Council. It's quite interesting to see that because, of course, a couple of months ago, Germany was trying to reduce expectations regarding the presidency, but it's a context that has generated so much expectations, knowing that we are speaking about crucial decisions, like you have pointed out very well, regarding the recovery plan, and especially the EU budget, but not only that. We are quite clear in the European Parliament that, of course, the decision on the EU budget will decide what will happen with this project. If we have a rebirth of the European project or nothing will happen. And of course, in this regard, the recovery plan has to point out very clearly that we need solidarity and we need clear actions. But we have to also mention that the proposal that the Commission has made is not a perfect proposal. There were a lot of voices asking for more resources and more programs and more clear directions when it comes to this type of recovery and which type of recovery we want to pursue. So I have to be very clear on that in the same time. Nevertheless, of course, the recovery is linked with other issues and they depend a lot on the capacity of each member state. And we have different answers that have been given to this crisis by member states. And we have to be very clear on that. So we can look, for instance, at the money that is being spent by each member state. And we see Germany allocates a lot of resources in terms of state aid. More than half of European state aid is allocated by Germany, whereas the other member states are struggling, so they don't have the capacity to do so. In the same time, we have countries that are focusing on businesses and others that are focusing on increasing consumption. We have countries that tend to focus on themselves and others that believe that they should open up in this current moment. So we have difficulties in having synergies and clear direction. And of course, the expectation is that the German presidency will manage to find common grounds to identify a common solution. And in this regard, I want to point out also a political element that the German Social Democrats have played a crucial role in the change of the positioning of Germany at European level. This is linked with the agreement between the two parties that form the coalition in Germany, but also this is linked with the fact that the German Social Democrats have been very clear on their positioning on European issues. And this shouldn't be ignored because in Romania, we only speak about Merkel. Of course, she plays a role. She's a very influential decision maker. But we have also to speak about the role of the Social Democrats, German Social Democrats, because at European level, we speak about that. And they are very clear on what they have pursued and what they have achieved in their negotiation with the Christian Democrats. And we have also to mention that, of course, I think to the public, to the Romanian audience, that the Social Democrats that are part of the coalition do play a role and they have strategic places in the government dealing with this presidency, like the Minister for European Affairs. And so we have to underline this fact. Furthermore, than just two small additional elements, beyond this discussion about budgets, in the German presidency, there are very interesting points regarding which type of recovery we want. So like on education. And in the same time, of course, we have to take into consideration all of those aspects. Romania has to use this opportunity. We can play a role, but we have to be active in the same time we see that Romania only participates with Secretary of State in the Council meetings. So we have to of course, to use this presidency in a constructive way for us as well. So that's my intervention. So thank you for your comments and take into consideration my reflections as well in your conclusion. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you for this contribution from the perspective of the member of European Parliament. That's also very helpful. Would somebody of the panelists like to react to some of the comments Viktor Negrescu just made? Yes, Radu, please.
I would like to thank so much Mr. Negrescu for his comments, and he's perfectly right. And I think there may even be a role in Romania in the future, and that would be great for us to see a clearer European agenda for the parties in power and for the parties in opposition. I think we have oversimplified in the past few years the differences in between different parties. Previously, the Social Democrats in power in Romania, and currently the Liberal Party in Romania. And I would stress one more thing, which was, I wrote it down initially in my talking points, and I think it's useful also in this context. Speaking of power opposition games, more and more the EU will be part of the national expectations game. It was compared to Hungary, for example, Romania has been waiting in a way for the contours of European solutions to present options and to present solutions. So, for example, tomorrow evening, we're waiting for the President and the Prime Minister to announce the recovery plan, a consolidated, larger recovery plan for the country. So I think more and more, and Romania is an example that more and more, including not only, let's say, us as individuals, people who are passionate about European affairs, but whoever is watching and has, for example, a political interest or a business interest, whether we like it or not, we have to more and more think our existence in terms of, let's say, Bucharest-Brussels existence, Berlin-Brussels existence, Stockholm-Brussels existence, and so on. Not only because of the linkages of the MFF and others, but also because our recovery is going to be a joint recovery. Unlike, let's say you want to go to somewhere in Europe for tourism, but hey, guess what? You're on a red list, or something is not being coordinated. Guess what? The same for the crisis, and I think this should be stressed. And this is the final argument on my side. We are in this boat together, and we have to succeed together. Fingers crossed, the German presidency.
That was a really nice final word by you, Radu. Thank you for that. But of course, I would also like to give the other panelists, if they want, there's no need, of course, to have a final word. So please, if you want, just let me know, Kai Olaf, Ambassador Cornescu, if you want to add something to this final word of Radu's. I don't see.
Maybe.
Okay. Yes, please.
Just briefly, on the expectations. Yes. So I think, of course, there was a projection of huge expectations. We all know that presidencies with the competencies, with the institution they have today, with the institutional setting which exists today, according to the treaties, they are not what they once used to be. But of course, Germany, with its political and economic weight, of course, is supposed to be a country which is able to do traditional functions of a presidency, which means to, that's a topic we always, or a metaphor we always have, to broker, so to find solutions, to be a clearinghouse, to find new initiatives, but also very much so to do crisis management. I think what has been a hallmark of German European policy for decades, and what has been after 1989, and especially also after 2004, at some points a little bit neglected, that is co-leadership and the engagement of everyone. We had periods in German European policy where we had a pivot to France, or where we had moments when there was the idea of establishing, was quite some time ago, of the big three, Berlin, Paris and London. So these times, I think, have gone. Franco-German relations are still an indispensable couple, but I think Germany has signaled at various stages that it wants to do a 360 degrees European policy. So to be also in touch with the countries from the eastern part of the EU, to be in touch with the old and the new north, to be in touch, of course, also with Southern Europe. It has not always been ideal, but I think a lot of diplomatic efforts and political efforts have been invested in the last years, and that's at least a precondition for fulfilling some of the expectations we have.
Okay. On that,
just
yes, please. Mm-hmm.
I like what Kai Olaf said about the need of for the EU and the German presidency to look 360 degrees. And that means, I translated it in what I have already mentioned, and I wanted to underline once again at the end. That means inclusiveness, and I'm really confident that this inclusiveness, which has been one of the, let's say, characteristics of the German behavior inside the European Union, will go on in this respect and even strengthen. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you to all of you for your participation at the panel. It was really an interesting discussion, and we as Friedrich-Ebert Foundation, of course, we face the same limitation as everybody does now, but we will go on to offer these digital formats. We do also a lot of other formats like infographics, publications, and so on. So please, let's stay in touch despite the corona. And thank you also to the participants for your attention, and stay safe. Thank you. Have a nice day.